Through a quality education, EAC aims to significantly reduce the number of children worldwide who are denied their right to education. Since 2012, EAC has worked with and through partner organizations to influence the enrollment and retention of out-of-school children that are faced or who are faced with extreme poverty, cultural barriers, disability, and conflict-affected environments, to provide them with an opportunity for a full course of quality primary education. In 2018, EAC had commitments in place to enroll over 10 million out-of-school children and is currently well on track to have over 10 million enrollments by our 10th anniversary in 2022. Over the course of the next year, as EAC leads up to its 10-year anniversary, we will be exploring through a series of webinars entitled under the theme 10 Years, Over 10 Million, Educating the Most Marginalized, What Does It Take? Each webinar in the series will focus on a specific element or strategy that has been vital to giving millions of out-of-school children the opportunity to learn. During each webinar, we will ask the questions, what did it take and what will it take? And how can we use what we have learned to date to enroll and educate not only the 10 million out-of-school children we're on track to enroll, but tens of millions more. I'm your host for today's webinar. My name is Sabrina Hervey. I am the technical head for West Africa and Asia for Educated Child. Today we will explore with some of Educated Child's partners and examine what it takes to ensure inclusion, not exclusion, for some of the most marginalized groups of children. Our partners will look at strategies that they have employed in both past and current EAC supported projects to ensure the inclusion of children engaged in labor, those children who are living with disabilities, children from ethnic and linguistic minorities, and children who are displaced. Many of you may be asking why we are not looking at girls. One of the EAC's core principles is to focus on the barriers that every child faces to receiving and accessing an education. And with that, our partners prioritize the most marginalized children, those facing severe challenges to receiving an education. And they help them overcome those barriers. In many cases, these are girls. But in other cases, we find that boys are facing more difficulties in accessing education. So by focusing on gender as a barrier and so cross-cutting throughout our work, it takes into account both girls and boys. Our panelists today, if they wouldn't mind joining me on the screen, are Farida Salat Mohammed from CARE, Somalia, Lotte is also joining us from CARE, or Lut, sorry. Denise Mutito from Girl Child Network, Kenya. Joyce Adalwa from Save the Children. And Ellie Marie Abaka from UNHCR. Each one of our panelists will focus on a different sub-theme. As I had already mentioned, looking at children who are engaged in labor, children from ethnic and linguistic minorities, children who are living with a disability, and those children who are displaced. And I just did that completely out of order, but we know the order that they'll be going in. A few housekeeping issues before we get started. You can raise your hand if you would like to ask a question online or verbally in the just kind of raise your hand in the thing, or you can post questions through the Q&A and we will try and answer them. If you're a past or current EAC partner and have some strategies and experiences that you would like to share, please feel free to raise your hand or post something in the chat so that we can call on you to do so. With that, I would love to start it off with our colleagues from CARE who will talk to us about working with children who are engaged in labor. So.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Farhia Salat from CARE Somalia, based in Mogadishu. And for us, we've worked with the EAC since 2013 all the way to 2016, and we are currently implementing the second phase of Educate a Child project. Yes, let's start. Next slide, please. Yes, the ESC project we were working with, we had a funding project from UK Aid in Somaliland and Puntland. Those are the northern side of Somalia. In the south, we focused in the urban centers of Kismayu and Mogadishu. And in Somaliland and Puntland, we focused in the rural remote areas. And the objectives were to increase access to education for ultra-marginalized children, IDPs and pastoralists affected by severe drought and conflict, and also to build quality and learning environment, that is, to increase teacher and school management capacity to support at-risk students, and social norm change to increase attendance retention among girls, IDPs, pastoralists, and socially discriminated children. And lastly, to enhance capacity for new enrollment, learning spaces, and materials in facilities. And also we enhanced the system capacity to support out-of-school children. That is, we supported the Ministry of Education and at federal government stage, and also at the state level and district level. Next. So in our context, child labor, this is, for us, we define it as any kind of work that deprives children of their childhood and their potential. So in Mogadishu, or generally in Somalia, if you walk across Somalia, you'd find a lot of children as shoe shiners, and mostly for boys. And for the girls, they work as domestic workers in houses. And this is mostly also common among the minority clans. Okay, Somalia has lots of clans. So we have, among the clans, we have the minority, like you would call them as a tribe. So we have the minority clans. And most of those children are the ones you'd find them working in as shoe shiners, or in restaurants, or hawking sodas in bus stops. And for girls, you'd find them in the house working as domestic workers. And also we count as children who work in the house as unpaid labor. And yes. So for us, intersection of poverty, gender, and child labor, we noticed that girls are severely affected by domestic labor, that is including unpaid chores, particularly in female-headed and ultra-poor households. In rural and remote areas, 38% of the female dropouts left school due to poverty, while 32% due to displacement and 14% due to the need to work. Unpaid domestic labor is reported by mothers as one of the main causes of girls' absenteeism. Next. So our project impacts, we enrolled 33,069 out-of-school children. This is out of a target of 30,100. 49 of those were girls, compared to 42% overall in South Central Somalia. We had a 91% retention rate, and 73 teachers completed pre-service training. And we expanded system capacity by 10,465 seats in Mogadishu and Kismayu. That is 4.4% of overall enrollment. Next. So to reach the most marginalized out-of-school children, we had accelerated basic education. So in this, where it's like the education system for accelerated basic education is compressed. So in doing 2 years of, 1 year of accelerated basic education is like 2 years of normal primary school education. So for this one, we target all the out-of-school children, and we enrolled 2,262, and we had flexible timetables. That is, we had dual shifts in 15 primary schools, IDP schools in Mogadishu, and also flexible schedules of AB classes. That means we have some entering in the morning and others in the afternoon, depending on when they have time. And also financial support, we gave 1,597 girls received scholarships, learning materials and dignity kits. And also 1,850 girls received reusable sanitary pads and hygiene supplies. And in supporting inclusive classroom, which teachers were trained on gender remedial support and inclusive practices. Next. So tracking attendance and retention, for the context of Somalia, we had higher absenteeism among child laborers. That is, they have to stop working some days to go and work, and seasonal absenteeism among the pastoralist students, depending on the drought. So when they move because of drought, they would stop going to school, and when the rain starts and they move back, they would continue going to school. And poor attendance tracking in Somali schools, and no centralized dropout tracking. So in response to all those, we enhanced capacity of schools on attendance tracking. We gave each school registers, and as a project, we would go visit and look at the registers and compare with what we observe in the class. Community education committees and head teachers trained on tracking attendance and retention, joint tracking of enrolled out-of-school children with the regional and district education officers to enhance accountability and also to ensure participation of the Ministry of Education. Next. So strategies to ensure children in labor participate in education. Before we get into this, Somalia has laws against child labor, and they say for the children to participate in labor, they have to be 15 years and above for non-hazardous labor, and 18 and above for hazardous labor. But law enforcement is next to zero, because the government also does not have control of all the sectors and all the regions of Somalia. So for us, as we provide a community with mobilization and sensitization for every school year, the beginning of school year. That is, we go to the community level, engage the communities, the religious leaders, parents on the importance of education, provision of flexi classes, engaging ministries of education to formulate policies regarding children in labor, direct costs such as provision of scholarship and partial grants. Indirect cost, we provided also uniform transport in some projects, hygiene and learning supplies. Opportunity cost, this is income for the families that feel like they will lose their wage if their child stop working and go to school. Would also engage them in some projects that we do, like conditional cash grants for them to send their kids to school. And also creation of social change platforms such as girls empowerment forums that we are currently also implementing with our sister project. Next. So yes, these are what I've also mentioned. We are doing all this community sensitization and mobilization scholarship. Currently, we are doing that with ESC and provision of uniforms, flexible timetables, and the empowerment forums for schools. Yes.
Thank you, Faria. Please go ahead and stay on. I would love to ask Lot to join us and just to talk to us for a couple of minutes about the additional work that Kara also did in Haiti around children who were involved in domestic labor.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, and thanks for the great presentation. So to add a bit about our work in Haiti, where we have enrolled 55,000 children through the EAC supported projects. A lot of this work was actually targeting children who are facing paid and unpaid labor, in particular those who are victims of the Restavek phenomenon in Haiti, where children from rural areas are being forced into labor into urban areas, basically sent by their families to live with relatives or non-relatives as unpaid domestic laborers in order to gain an education or even to offset some of the costs faced by their families. Among the participants of our project, we have noticed that 21% were not living with their parents. And although only 2% of their caregivers admitted that the children worked for money, what we have noticed is that when asking the children, working at the home or at a farm was one of the main causes of absenteeism. And 38% of the children at the baseline mentioned that they did not want to go to school because they were too tired to attend class, which is a proxy result indicating that children were not receiving adequate time to rest or to study, and also often are malnourished due to being not being cared for. So when looking at our results, we did have a 7 percentage point increase in the enrollment rate in the targeted households in urban areas. So the overall enrollment of the children in those households increases from 89% to 97%. It's worth noting that this happened at the same time as a major economic crisis, as well as a major disaster had hit Haiti. And in the middle of a governance crisis during which many of the government-sponsored scholarships had been canceled. Among the children that were enrolled, we did have a particular impact on those whose parents or caregivers were participating in what we call village savings and loans associations, which support parents to come together and save and start obtaining businesses, to obtaining capital for small businesses, and also obtaining funds for their basic needs, therefore reducing the need to send children away from the home. We have also noticed that the participation in village savings and loans associations had a direct impact in reducing absenteeism rates among the children who were enrolled. So this highlights the particular importance of supporting children in labor by working with their families and making sure that they do have the capacity to keep their children in school and keep their children at home vis-a-vis sending them away for different forms of child labor, including hazardous labor. Besides that, we have also worked with schools to make sure that school administrations, school management committees, parents associations in this case, or parents councils as they are called in Haiti, and teachers did not discriminate against children who are in domestic labor, who are often the poorly dressed ones at the same level as others, often do not have access to hygiene supplies, and have also provided them with enrollment kits that included learning materials, supplies for school, as well as shoes and hygiene supplies. Thank you so much, and I will stop here.
Thank you so much. I think it's really important to look at this issue that is on two very different contexts, two different continents, and see some of the connections across the two, the support to the schools, but also direct support to the children, right? The need to provide scholarships or school kits, things to help them have a sense of dignity as they go to school. But I think you both, and I would like to come back to this later. Faria, you mentioned the attendance tracking, and I would like to reflect when we get into the discussion part of this a little bit more on how it's just the effect of tracking a child's attendance plays into whether or not they are going to school or continue attending. And the support, I think it was really important, the need to find ways to replace the lost income that the child is helping provide to the family, right? Because this is income that is helping these families oftentimes really live and survive. So what happens to that opportunity cost? Is it scholarships, the village savings and loans, but making sure that there's some way that the families can continue to have that income. And the support to the parents is so important. And I think we're going to find that many of these elements play out throughout the different types of children that we support who are really the most marginalized and excluded. With that, I would like to ask Dennis from Girl Child Network in Kenya to join us and tell us about the work that Girl Child has been doing with children with disabilities and their families and communities.
Good evening, good morning all. My name is Dennis Mutiso and I work with Girl Child Network. Our partnership with the ESC dates back to the year 2012 to present, when we started to implement an education programs targeting out of school children from marginalized areas. The first phase targeted 32,000, and we managed to achieve, and actually we managed to surpass that target. The current phase targets 47,515 out of school children from marginalized areas, and we are on the right course. Allow me to talk about what it takes to make sure that we bring children living with disabilities and offices to school. Next. What you'll notice is that in Kenya, we have scanty data on persons or children living with disability. The data that we have from Kenyan Bureau of Statistics indicate that 2.2 million people live with disability, and you find that that one is slightly below 15% provided by the way and by World Health Organization. So it becomes a bit challenging to plan when we do not have data that we can rely on. Next. The first question that people usually ask before we talk about what it takes to bring children with disabilities to school is, what are some of the challenges that they face? You find that we have some social norms and practices that makes it hard for children with disabilities to enroll and remain in schools. Some communities believe that it is a curse or it's a bad omen to give birth to a child with disability. In Kenya, when you give birth to a child with disability, that child belongs to the mother. When you give birth to a child who is bright, who is okay, that child belongs to the father. Sometimes most of the parents tend to run away when they find out that their wives gave birth maybe to children with disability. So it's a Of course, we have issues to do with discrimination based on those disabilities. You find that most of the children, they are there to be seen, but they do not participate in decision-making tempos. We also have other systemic challenges emanating from poor service delivery from the duty bearers, and this could be because majority of them are not aware of the policies that are in place to support education for children with disabilities. We also have attitude issues from the same duty bearers, and so you find that those systemic issues makes it hard for such children to enroll and remain in schools. We also have a friendly learning environment that does not meet the bare minimum principles of design for all. You find that the learning environment is not welcoming, it's not accessible, and also the teaching pedagogies are not responsive to the learning needs of children living with disabilities. We also have talked about the poor teaching methods. We also have attitude from the children. You find that they do not value and embrace children living with disabilities. So current interventions by the government include but not limited to, next. Yes, current intervention, you find that Kenya is a signatory to the United Nations Convention on Rights of Persons Living with Disabilities. And we have domesticated that convention. So we have the Disability Act 2003, we have Basic Education Act, sector policy for learners and trainees with disabilities, among others. Of course, the Kenyan Constitution 2010 notwithstanding. So we do not have, it's not that Kenya does not have the legal policy framework to support education for children with disabilities. The policies are there, the acts are there, but implementation remains wanting. We also have the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection that runs several social protection schemes. They support children with disabilities and offices with basic necessities like scholarship, medical care, and all that. Under free primary education, the Ministry of Education gives a capitation of $20 for children with disabilities per year, over $14 that is provided for the normal children, but that is not the actual cost of education for children with disabilities in Kenya. Sometimes you find that the cost might even range from $500 to $700. So that is not the actual cost. The interventions by Cultural Network through the our joint project with ESC, what we are currently doing to make sure that we bring these children to schools, we sensitize communities on true causes of disability so that we can do away with those myths and perceptions around disability. Next. We also support assessment and placement. First is identification, assessment, and placement of these children with disabilities, because it is after assessment that the children that determines the rightful place where the children will be placed, of course, depending on the degree and the nature of disability. Next. Through the project that we are implementing with the ESC, we also, yeah, that is still assessment. You can see assessment going on. Next. Yes, we also support referrals. You find that once assessment has been done, you find that some children may need further medication. So we do refer them to hospitals for further assessment and also medical intervention. For instance, you can see these children on your left. They have impaired challenges. So we referred them to hospitals for corrective surgeries. Next. We also do provide teaching and learning materials. You find that for you to make sure that the children are retained their learning and the learning is relevant to their needs, you must provide the teaching and learning materials. So that's something that we do under the project. Next. Those are still some of the materials that we provide to the schools. Next. We also support the schools to modify their infrastructure so that they become accessible and friendly to learners living with disabilities. And the aim is to make sure that at least our schools meet the bare minimum principles of designs for all. Next. We also support the schools with infrastructure like toilets, because you find that most of the schools do not have wash facilities, and those that have those facilities are not disability friendly. So we try to make sure that we support the schools to build a friendly infrastructure for learners with disabilities. Next. Yes, next. Those are the same infrastructure. We also do what we call the Support Family Matters programs. And such programs are conducted by our project community facilitators. And the aim is to mediate the small conflicts that may make it impossible for children living with disabilities to attend schools. So we make sure that we have our household visitation by our community facilitators to make sure that those children that have been identified, assessed, and placed to schools attend schools without fail. Next. We also do advocacy under the project because you find that we have a lot of laws and policy frameworks supporting inclusive education, but you find that the majority of the laws and policies are not implemented fully. And this maybe could be, some of the reasons could be negative attitude by the duty bearers, or they do not have the knowledge on existence of such legal frameworks. Next. Yes, some of the recommendations that we are making to make sure that we bring all these children to school, we are saying that for these children to go to schools, it shouldn't be a joint effort of them, both government, the communities, the schools, the teachers, the parents, the civil society, and also private sector. So it takes the joint effort to make sure that we bring all these children to schools. So we also recommend the Ministry of Education and other state agencies to enforce the laws and policies that support inclusive education. We are also recommending civil society to come up with a joint and focused strategy to hold the government to account on matters fulfilling their legal obligation. There's also a need for continuous community sensitization to construct some of the myths around disability. And we also need to come up with a national data bank for children living with disability, because it is not easy to plan without data. Thank you. That's it. That's what I had for today.
Thank you, Dennis. I think there's a few things that you pointed out that I do think kind of can be drawn across all of these groups. And one of those is really the role that social norms, attitudes, and myths and beliefs around some of these groups of children play in keeping them out of school, and the need to deconstruct those and to break them down and fight them. But you also pointed out something that I think this will come up again later around needing enabling environment and a legal and policy framework to be in place. But even with that in place, it has to be enforced and implemented. And the role that the communities and from the grassroots level play in ensuring that that takes place. So I think you really pointed out some key things that we need to keep in mind as we move forward in this work. And with that, I would like to ask Joyce from Save the Children to talk to us about a group that oftentimes I think we forget, and that's children from ethnic and linguistic minorities, and the importance of providing these children with multilingual education.
Thank you so much to all my colleagues on this panel for the presentations that they have already made. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. As you heard, my name is Joyce Adolwa, and I'm with Save the Children US. Over the next few minutes, I will be speaking with you about our engagement with Educate a Child in Myanmar and Thailand, with a focus on the Access Initiative. Access stands for Assisting Conflict-Affected Children Enroll and Stay in School. My presentation will focus on multilingual education and the lessons that we have learned, not only in working with Educate a Child, but also working in other countries beyond Myanmar and Thailand. And of course, our relationship with the EAC has spanned many decades and in many other countries. Next slide, please. So our partnership with EAC in Myanmar was established between 2014 and 2016 and was aimed at increasing access to, enrollment in, and education of all children affected by conflict that are located in Eastern Myanmar, including asylum seekers, undocumented migrant children, and refugees living in Thailand. Specifically, we worked at the Mysot, Bangkok, and 7 refugee camps in the eastern region and the border with Thailand. We worked as a consortium, so it was not just Save the Children implementing. We had other partners, the Foundation for Rural Development, Help with Without Frontiers, Current Teachers Working Group, and Right to Play. This initiative initially had targeted 84, just slightly over 84,000 out-of-school children, but access at the conclusion had reached over 91,000 children. 51% of them were boys and 49% were girls. We also expanded access to, beyond, we built on access to inform our work beyond these areas. And one of the things that the key results that we found is that it did actually increase access to education. It did result in changes in attitudes towards educating migrant children, especially, and ethnic minority groups, and also understanding of the options available for these ethnic minority groups and migrant children within the communities that they were either hosted in or were already living in, for those that were part of the Myanmar population. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about the context that we were working in. And you're all aware that conflict and fragility affecting Myanmar has been a protracted crisis for some time, and has resulted in widespread displacement of resident populations and disruptions to basic services, increasing the risks for children not accessing education, impact on child protection issues, and many others. Of this, of course, ethnic minority groups are disproportionately impacted, and we can't. And beyond that, when we think about migrant children who are not resident populations in Myanmar, that index goes even higher. At the time of implementing this initiative, public investment in education in Myanmar was already among the lowest in the world. It was around 0.6% of the gross domestic product. The average education received by a child in Eastern Myanmar was less than 4 years, and attendance rates were less than 10%. The gap to accessing education for migrant, the migrant children living in the camps was, was higher to less than 5%. In 2014, at least 130,000 refugees lived in 9 camps along the Thai-Myanmar border. The children making half the population, they made up half the population of the camps, and had limited access to education, both, as I said, with the focus on MLE, a lot of it had to do with the languages of instruction versus the languages these children were speaking and where they were coming from. Next slide. So I like this slide with the river because it denotes the barriers to education. If you look at the river as a barrier, and how we facilitate and support children to cross over that river to the other side. And we have already established that education is a right, and so multilingual education is both a rights and equity issue. If children are to access learning equitably, then we must allow them to first learn key concepts in the languages that they understand best. This is especially true for children from ethnic minority groups, and also children who are migrants and the responsibilities of the host countries to make sure that they are accessing education. It is also well recognized that language is a key element of education. Across the globe, international research demonstrates the significant benefits that focus on mother tongue-based instruction or multilingual education. In the early grades, it brings to education, it has an impact on education quality and continuity. So access, quality, and quality education in a country is highly dependent on the language of instruction. It's also increasingly recognized that fluency in the language of instruction acts as a significant predictor of learner success in reading competencies and comprehension of other subjects. Comprehension facilitates the improved learning of other languages, increases classroom participation, and reduces the likelihood of dropout. So even though we know all this and this information is out there, we also know that language considerations are one of the largest barriers to attaining learning outcomes across many countries. So we also know from research that many of the children who drop out early from school are displaced children and children of minority groups who tend to live in the most excluded and resource constrained settings. And they also speak a variety of other languages that are not included in the national or host country languages of instruction. Save the Children is putting together a multilingual learners kit. This is just an FYI, and I am going to be picking some of those key lessons learned that we are already putting together to address some of the key considerations that need to go into multilingual education, both based on our experience implementing in Myanmar, Thailand, Ethiopia. Also, we also had an initiative in Ethiopia that was funded by the EAC and other donors across the globe. So thank you so much for going to the next slide. So the piece that I just mentioned, the Multilingual Learner Toolkit, highlights 12 key considerations, but for the purposes of this presentation, I'll highlight 6. The first is government language policy. We know that language can be highly political and has been used as a power tool to divide or unite people. Government policies on minority languages may vary from being highly supportive to strongly negative, which in turn impacts what languages or sets of languages are used and taught in school. It has that level, it's a power dynamic. And going on to languages as the second point, language script, the availability of the written form of language is a critical factor when it comes to publishing materials for schools or being able to translate key concepts for learning. Is the minority language in written form? How does the written form differ from how that language is used in speech and in daily life? This is an important factor that is related to the next point, which is logistics. The logistics of translating, writing, and printing materials in different languages is another inhibitor for multilingual education success. The need for books in a language that children can understand is critical. However, the cost of being able to, translate, write, and print such materials in a variety of languages can be high, and it can also be time-consuming. Which also brings me to the next point on the next slide, please, which is the number of languages spoken in the community. One, we know in Eastern Myanmar and with the ethnic minority groups, there are a variety of languages that are spoken in the community, and those languages are not highlighted in the national languages that are used for as the languages of instruction. So when we have a teacher who does not come from any of these minority communities and cannot speak the language, it's a key inhibitor for delivering learning or learning absorption for the kids at the kids level. If the language of delivery does not have written material, as I said before, that presents additional challenges. But such challenges can also be overcome if the teacher is aware of the different languages that exist, because then they can be creative in how they balance their teaching. If there are materials or the lack of materials in the classroom, especially at the early grades, and the availability for instruction, and if there is a translator or a language assistant to support the teacher in the classroom. Another factor, and this one is related to the politics of language, or something that I mentioned before, the government policies on the languages of instruction or national languages, is the parental attitude towards language. As we noted, the government language policies do impact perceptions on the value of a particular language or sets of languages versus another. And so parents may prefer a national language or a foreign language of instruction for their children without really understanding the value of their own language or of being bilingual or multilingual and how this interacts with the learning ability of children. And finally, a child's access to early learning is critical. And of course, this is connected to the parent or caregiver's own learning experience. And the impact of their learning continuity is even greater if learning can be or has been conducted in a language that the child can understand so that they can build their comprehension from early on and be able to use that comprehension in other subjects and progress through education. So these are the 6 key highlights that we found, next slide, that have clearly being able to understand, to address the social fabric at the agency level, looking at the community and society levels and how language is perceived, which languages are seen as more dominant and how children learn are critical. Addressing policy issues is critical if you're going to be successful in making sure education is inclusive. And as we noted, multilingual education is critical for ensuring the right to education for all children. And for Save the Children that works with the children that are most excluded, most deprived, and marginalized, we need this as a lever to facilitate equitable education and inclusivity in communities, and especially for minority groups and children who are displaced from their home country. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joyce. And I think once again, you've really brought out the importance of policy and addressing the needs of the children, making sure that we are focused on what they bring to the table as well as what we want to provide them. The fact that, we cannot expect learning to happen if children don't understand the language that they're being taught in is so important, such an important takeaway from this. So thank you. And I think that's your presentation actually segues right into our next presentation from UNHCR. Ellie, welcome. And I think I have nothing else to say because I think Joyce just segued straight into what you are going to talk to us about.
It's perfect. Thank you so much. Ryan, maybe you could play the video. Thanks so much, Ryan, and thanks, Sabrina, and the other participants. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. We played that video because it's sort of a condensed version, if you like, of what I'm going to speak about now. My name is Ellie Aldaka. I work on refugee education for UNHCR, which, as you know, is the UN Refugee Agency. And UNHCR and EAC have been in partnership since 2012. We've been providing access to primary education for really some of the world's most marginalized populations, refugees and others who have been displaced because of conflict and crisis. Of the approximately 10 million refugee children and youth under UNHCR's care in 2020, 7.1 million were of school age. Unfortunately, their access to education was limited, with 3.4 million unable to attend school. As you can imagine, this has vast ramifications for the individuals and communities they live in. And thanks, Ryan, for the slide. You can see there the picture of Rihanna. She's one of three sisters, Rihanna, Ikra, and Fauzia, and they're Ethiopian refugees who live in Kakuma refugee camp. Despite missing years of schooling, Rihanna and Ikra are enrolled in school in the camp, supported by the EAC program. They are two of the lucky children to be able to go to school. If you can change the slide, please. Their older sister, though, Fauzia, wasn't so lucky, as she had to work in order to feed and house her two younger sisters. But Fauzia sees the value of education. As Rihanna says, when she sees us go to school, she feels like she is also going to school. While refugee children at primary level are less likely to be enrolled in school than their peers, UNHCR has seen a growth in their access to education. In 2019, and before the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, I have to emphasize, 77% of refugee children were enrolled in primary education. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this is due in part to the EAC partnership. For example, from 2016 to 2019, we managed to get over 1.2 million out-of-school children into school. And through our ongoing close cooperation, we're continuing that trend. And you can see there some of the key project achievements from the time, in addition to the enrollment. So classroom construction, purchase of desks and other furniture, training for teachers and other education personnel, support for children with special needs, so picking up some of the things that Dennis spoke about earlier, and also campaigns on the importance of education. And they're just some of the things. Of course, we did many, many more. If we can go to the next slide, please. Of course, a chance of enrolling in school can do wonderful things for a refugee child. For example, there's Azima. She's from the Rohingya community, and she was a refugee in Malaysia. At the age of 11, she enrolled in a school for refugees funded by the EAC program. Azima was a bright student, and she quickly made up for her many lost years of education. And now, after being resettled to the United States, Azima is enrolling in a nursing course through Buffalo University. She wants eventually to study medicine and become a pediatric surgeon. If we can go to the next slide, please. So what does it take to get a refugee child into school? Well, first of all, we have a strategy of integration into national education systems. This leads to sustainability, certification, and proper monitoring and evaluation of schools and learning. You might be familiar with the Global Compact on Refugees, which was affirmed by the UN General Assembly in 2018. This really provides the world with a blueprint for ways to transform how we respond to refugee situations, benefiting both refugees and, really importantly, the communities that host them. So in the spirit of the Global Compact, we work on strengthening national systems for the benefit of all children, refugees and host community alike. Please, Ryan. Thanks. So this means, for example, building classrooms on the outskirts of Mahama refugee camp in Rwanda, where the Ministry of Education runs a school for refugee and Rwandan children. It also means recruiting teachers, especially female teachers, who can be positive role models for girls. Because as we know, and we talked about earlier, girls are often, not always, but often less likely to be in school. If we can go to the next slide. It means providing school supplies, desks, and learning materials for children like Anita and Janet. You can see them there on the slide, and their best friends who go to a school supported by EAC in Kiaka Refugee Settlement in Uganda. It means empowering parent community groups to take an active role in their children's education. It means using the power of sport, designed and run by trained refugee facilitators, to introduce fun, healthy activity for children in EAC. And if we can go to the last slide, please. Thanks. So I'm a teacher myself, and before I became a teacher, I thought that school was mostly about learning how. School is actually much more. It teaches children how to become productive and self-sufficient members of the communities around them. And for refugees, I really personally think it gives something else as well. It gives refugee children hope when everything around them is confusing and traumatic. So we thank EAC for partnering with us to give hope to hundreds of thousands of refugee children around the world. Thank you.
And Ellie, we thank each and every one of you and those who are also joining us or aren't here for partnering with us to have such a tremendous impact that you've all really reminded us that we have. As I said to you the other day, and I'll say it again, your presentations, the work that you're doing, comments today, but particularly the story that you just told it really hits home to us that over the last 9.5 going on 10 years, a child that we enrolled when we first began is now potentially in university or beyond, depending on where that child started or came back into school or started school within their primary school life. So it's really humbling to see that these children are actually moving forward and making something of their lives, and that we're so grateful to our partners for helping make that possible. I would like to invite all of our partners that are panelists today to come back on, turn their videos on. We have some questions from the audience, and I have some questions for you, and I'm sure that your responses will prompt more questions. So please do join me on camera. So the first question I actually have, and this is for everyone, is around inclusion. And there's kind of two parts. And Joyce, you touched on it, some with Save the Children's kind of definition of inclusion. But if you could each just address what it means to have inclusive, truly inclusive education, and what does it take? So maybe on the what does it take, a few key points. What are the prime things, if you had to say it and kind of put it in like five to 6 points that you must have in order to have truly inclusive education? And I'll help you out. If somebody's already said it, you can add something else. And anybody can just jump in.
Yes, I think there is always this confusion between inclusion and integration. Whereas integration is where children become ready for accommodation by mainstream. Inclusion is about many aspects, like children learning in their neighborhoods, because you can't say that when you take children maybe about 200 kilometers away from their homes, maybe in a school, and you say that one is inclusion. That one is inclusion. Inclusion is about children learning in their neighborhood. It's about education that meets their learning needs. It's not about a system that a child fitting in the system. It's about the child fitting in the education system. Again, inclusion is about appreciating our diversity, celebrating our culture. We need to see those diversity as a source of richness, not as a source of conflict. So it's about valuing our differences and embracing each other, and also accommodating our differences. Thank you.
I like that. Integration is not inclusion. That's a little good one to kind of keep you remembering. Your child might be in the classroom, but that doesn't mean that they're included. Ellie, I see your mic has gone off. Go ahead.
No, I just taking a slightly different and maybe an airplane approach to this. For me, it really means putting SDG 4 into action. So education for all. And we find that displaced children, refugees, internally displaced children, they face so many barriers to being included. One of the first barriers is that they're not even counted often. And so what does it take? It takes including those children from the start, planning for them, for being able to have the infrastructure, the teachers, the things necessary to have them join school. And so I think it really, maybe I'm trying to say it comes from both ends. It comes from the ground up approach that Dennis mentioned, which is really valuable, but it also comes from this higher level. And it's not just policy, it's putting that policy into practice. Thanks.
No, thank you. And I think I often like this. I refer to true change actually takes place from a bottom-up, top-down approach, that you have to have both, particularly when you're looking at policy implementation and policy change. So I really, and I kind of chuckled while you were saying, but not because it was funny, but you reminded me of something that we say often in Educate a Child, and which every one of you being one of our partners is probably fully aware of. That, you know, we insist on identification and tracking of individual children, because we say that you don't count if you're not counted. And how can anybody count you and plan for you if we don't actually know who you are? So thank you for that reminder, Ellie. I just realized that we are a gender reversed. The gender norms are not norms, but balance is reversed in this panel, and we let Dennis go first because we are female strong today. Lode, I think you wanted to speak there. Or Joyce or Faria, anyone else that wants to contribute to this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for the question. I think that the issue of inclusion also has to do with the value of diversity, right? And so, you know, when we think about multilingual education from that perspective, then to what extent does the governments that we are working with in the different countries value their own diversity to make and facilitate the inclusion of ethnic minority groups or groups that have been traditionally marginalized because of where they come from, and to what extent do resources that the government has to offer both in education and other areas become equitably distributed, because then that brings up the question of materials of instruction. It brings up the question of teachers availability who are from these communities, and the progression of graduation from these minority groups. The other aspect and the question that came up on the chat is if you have, I come from Kenya originally, and we have like 46 to 50 languages. And of course, it might not be possible to have instruction materials in all those languages. We have the official language, which is Swahili. We have English as well as an official language of instruction. So what happens then? And I think that the important part is, one, to have materials that come from the communities that we are working in. Even if the language of instruction has to be the national language or a foreign language, we must really make an effort to decode that material into at least visuals that children can relate to, and for teachers to have teachers that come from these communities support the communities so that they can be able to interpret and translate some of these concepts for the students that they have in the classroom, and really just bring language and that level of diversity as an issue and awareness that happens in the classroom, understanding and being more supportive of communities so that we can all move forward when it comes to learning and comprehension for children from these most marginalized and disenfranchised societies. Thank you.
Thank you. All very, very important and poignant points. We'll leave it open to anyone else that would like to touch on this topic. Well, go ahead.
I'd like to raise the point of intersectionality and the importance of looking at inclusion through a multifaceted lens. When I am looking, for example, at the context of Somalia, we are looking at disability, both mental health disability and children with disabilities other than mental health, how the impact of disability on learning is exacerbated by gender disparities. For instance, how gender discrimination tends to be exacerbated for children with disabilities and the different types of discrimination that they face, as well as how it's maximized among minorities, such as the groups that Farhia mentioned. For instance, if a child is a girl, we speak Afmai instead of Afmahatri or standard Somali. And if that child has a disability, and that child is more affected than others, and the multiple types of support that that child needs, and to what extent the education system is able to capture those nuances in the education sector plan, as well as in the prioritization of the different areas. We are also working with the Federal Ministry of Education, as well as the state ministries of education in capitation grants and in sensitizing in schools to apply capitation grants to support the specific needs of the children who are the most marginalized and the different layers of marginalization that they face. I think it's important for us to understand that marginalization adds to different types of it. And at the end of the day, we will have levels of marginalization and discrimination within a classroom.
Thank you. Thank you for those insights. And Farhia, don't feel obligated, but if you want to wrap us up on this question, and we will move to a question from the audience. And Joyce, I wanted to thank you for pulling that question in from the chat. I was actually going to read it and have you say your response, but you beat me to it. Go ahead, Farhia.
Yes, for us, the inclusion, as Lot has said, especially in Somalia, it's with the different layers, including, for example, the IDPs. And you would look at children who are coming from the IDP camps, and maybe they're disabled, and also they come from the minority clans. So we look at all those things and we identify those children when we do our enrollment at the beginning of the year. So for us, inclusion is not just children who are out of school. We look at different layers and make sure that they participate in education and are retained in schools. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And I think you've all helped us really broaden our definition and outlook on what it means to have inclusive education and to have inclusion and not just integration. We have a question from the audience who wants to ask it verbally. So Renman, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but you are unmuted, or you mic has been activated, so you can unmute yourself and ask your question. I can't really hear you. Try to unmute again. Otherwise, I can read the question you had from the chat or from the questions if you want. Okay, he is, it seems, having problems with his mute or his mic. He did have a question, and I think it's probably for several of you, but also for Dennis particularly. And it was on, is the impact of the elimination of disabled children, what is the impact, I think, of the elimination of disabled children on the psychic side of the child? I believe the psychosocial side. of the child. So he's trying to answer. I think he's wanting to know how we can eliminate the impact of psychosocial issues on children with disabilities. And any one of you that wants to take it, but I know, because I know many of you are working on that, but Dennis, I know you're particularly focused on children with disabilities and their psychosocial support.
I think the first thing we usually say, if you want to support children with disabilities, actually they do not need our sympathy, they need our empathy. They need to be appreciated. We need to provide them with several pathways, not just academic pathway only, but several pathways that can link them to opportunity, and education is one of them, but education that is relevant. But first, before you can even support the child, the focus should be on the mother. But one of the things that we've also tried to do away with is to make sure that the language that we use sometimes to a large extent also is discriminative in nature. For instance, when we talk about undisabled person or undisabled child, what that means is that the first thing that we saw is the disability, not the person. But when we talk about a child living with disability, we humanize the language. That means what we see first is the child, a human being, before we can see the disability. Now, talking about the parents, before you can even support or talk about supporting the children, you need to support the parents themselves, psychosocially and emotionally. Because if they are not ready, if they are not psychologically prepared to take care of such children, believe you me, enrolling those children or taking them for assessment and placement, it becomes a challenge. So we also need to focus on the parents to prepare them to be in a position to take care of their children. So providing psychosocial support to parents is as equal as, is also important, as well as providing psychosocial support to the children. But also, again, it will also depend on the evolving capacity of the child, because different methodologies of psychosocial support fits in different age groups for such children. Thank you.
Thanks, and I think I'm gonna thank you, Dennis. I think this is so important. I read the question as was, but it is we emphasize the child in everything that we do, right? It's making sure that child, we know that children have agency. They are capable, and changing that, like raising the bar of what we think children are capable of, and not having super low expectations, even for children who are living with disabilities. And it's so important, because when you have that high bar, they'll rise to it, right? Please, if any of the rest of you are partners, because I know you all work with children with disabilities, but also with these questions and these issues. So please do chime in if you have something to add to that.
I wanted to highlight the impact of developing leadership skills and social-emotional learning among children with disabilities. We have been tracking the prevalence of anxiety and depression among the school populations we work with, and the subset of children that are facing anxiety and depression among those with disabilities. One of the interventions that we have found to be particularly impactful in addressing the learning barriers for children with disabilities was girls' empowerment forums, essentially groups that come together under a mentor's guidance to develop leadership skills through practical activities and through girl-led interventions. That's a moment where a girl with a disability is able to take action to address the barriers that she herself is facing. She is not just in a position of being pitied or discriminated. She is in a position of being heard. And the fact that that girl is able to participate in a community education committee, to provide input, to be part of the solution is really important. The fact that that girl is also able to connect with other girls and broaden her social network is really important, particularly if that girl has a double discriminatory situation. For example, if she's facing discrimination from being from a minority and from having a disability.
Yeah, you know, that.
Thanks, Joyce.
You talked about the social emotional learning, and Dennis, you talked about the need for us to really look at the beyond the child, to look at the what do you call it, the ecosystem, the social, the ecosystem that the child is operating in for that multi-pronged approach. This is really about integration, right? Because if you're really looking at the support at the child level and building their agency, as Lat talked about, you can't build a child's agency, especially a child with disabilities, whether mental or physical, without also looking at what's happening at home and the caregiver support. So when you're looking at the psychosocial support or mental health for the child, you should also link that to the caregiver support. When you're looking at health and access to health and nutrition, it's not just for the child, it's also for the caregiver, and building their understanding of what resources are available. And related to that, we can't talk about access to any of these services and the child protection services and social services that exist without looking at the national policy and how they are enacted and the funding streams that are available, so that you can have access to, this child can have access to, referral, other referral networks. And it's also important that we have found at Save the Children, and also from my experience working with CARE, is the integration of children with disabilities in schools that are accommodating, not just schools that are all children with disabilities go to this special school, but really facilitating that integration so that they feel they are part of society. And other children who may not have the same disabilities or, or have any disabilities become more aware of the challenges and the issues that children with disabilities have. And this facilitates greater acceptance and bridges and aspirations, so that they know that they can aspire to be anything that they need to be, and not look at their disability as an inhibiting factor. But how do we facilitate that engagement so that they become members, equal members of society that are differently abled?
Thank you. And I want to point out that many of these factors that we're talking about for the inclusion of children with disabilities equally go to the other excluded children, right? Like, if we really want to help ensure true inclusive education, we need to look, especially like Joyce, what you just said, at the whole system, everything around the child and the child itself, to see where the support needs to be and what needs to be done. And it goes for refugee children, children who are migrants, displaced. I think all of the children that are facing these extreme barriers, we really need to look beyond just the child to see where we can go. We have some additional questions from the audience. So I know I haven't given everybody a chance to talk, but hopefully you'll get to jump in here. This is for Faria, and I guess Lotwa, any of you can also jump in. How do you ensure that children who are engaged in child labor are not overwhelmed, quote, by both working and attending night classes or other classes, I guess? Are there any psychosocial support strategies for this aspect for the children? Again, coming back to the psychosocial support for children.
Yes, currently we are implementing the forums that Lot has mentioned. So for that one also, we have mentors and facilitators who, with training of giving them life skills and everything, they also look at their mental health, both boys and girls empowerment forums. And also for us, I think the most important, we try to get them in schools and for them not to work. And this is the priority first. So if we can do that, then it's better than having them work and go to school. But our first priority is to get them to not work and go to school. And this will involve the parents. We have a community mobilization and sensitization every year, every quarter of the schools, for example, and we talk to the family and the parents. And if the family needs extra support, we would, for example, link them with other projects that we are working for, including the cash grants and giving them the VSLM lot also mentioned. So we try and mitigate that before it happens. They stay in school, they don't work. If they have to work, then we also would look into psychosocial support and include them in the forums that they can have their peers and they can have a facilitator to talk to.
Thank you. I think once again, and this has been coming out in many of the strategies and the things that we really need to take forward is the multi-sectoral approach and involving other areas and other sectors and helping support the children. It's not just about the teachers, it's not just about what's going on in the school, but there's other support systems that need to be drawn in to support these children. And of course, we would much rather them not be working. Once again, from the audience, so I'm going to go to a question from Lynn. She says, thank you all for the good work your organizations are managing. As specially funded projects, by definition, the projects end. What progress has been made in promoting Ministries of Education, and I'm going to add to our things, and other sectors, to embrace inclusion policies and appropriate strategies to support all children? Anyone that wants to jump in?
Maybe I'll jump in if that's okay, Sabrina. Just because we have a lot of experience in this area, refugee children in particular are not always granted access to schools. It's not even an issue of unavailability of infrastructure and teachers. It's sometimes policies or the practices on the ground that prevent children being granted access to school. And so we've had a lot of experience in working very closely with Ministries of Education on exactly this. And I'll give two examples, maybe one in Chad. We have within Chad, on the border close to Darfur, a large population of refugees there. It's quite a protracted situation. Actually, they've been there for quite some time. And there were local community schools, but those schools were not leading to certification. They were not being monitored or overseen by anyone. And as you can imagine, had different standards and qualities of education, some very good, I have to say, and some perhaps not so good. But there was a large variance in quality and the schools. And so we worked closely with the Ministry of Education, talking with them about the situation, and then came up with a joint plan. So we went with them to that region of Chad and talked first of all to the community groups, to the parents, to the teachers, to the people running the schools, to the students themselves, and talked about the advantages of moving into a national system. And it was really successful. So as of, I want to say 7 years ago, but I might be a little bit wrong on that, possibly a little bit less. Those schools have been taken over by the government of Chad. We are still supporting. So Lynn, to answer your question, yeah, additional infrastructure was needed, teacher training, etc. And so it was very important to have a commitment from us and jointly with EAC, I have to say, to be able to say, we've got multi-year funding will come in and help out on those aspects. But that worked well. Sorry, I feel like I'm talking a long time, but if I can just give one other example from Malaysia, where children, the policy actually blocks refugee children from going to school. But again, we've had success. So as of 5 years ago, none of the community schools hosting refugee children in Malaysia were certified, but taking very much the same approach of quiet dialogue with the government, of negotiation with them. And also they can see what we're doing already and the support we've given. They have actually moved in the last several years to register some of those schools, which is a huge achievement for us. So thanks. I'll be quiet now. Sorry if I went on a little bit long.
I think that's okay. I think it was valuable. We obviously, and again, if any of our other partners and panelists would like to come in with a question on really how we're helping promote ministries to embrace inclusion policies and appropriate strategies to support all children.
I would say in Kenya, we have more than we need in terms of a legal policy framework that supports inclusive education. Joyce would tell you that Kenya is a country, we say Kenya is a country of constitution, but without constitutionalism. Because we have so many policies, but implementation is wanting. Allow me to cite an example. In 2005, we came up with civil society came together to lobby for enactment of a legal policy framework on inclusive education. By then it was called the Special Needs Education Policy Framework of 2009. But before we could implement, even before we could come up with the implementation guidelines, the government was back to the civil society requesting for funding to review the policy framework. And right now, as we talk, we have the sector policy for learners and trainees with disability. Of course, within different priority areas like quality, access, investment, and all that. But now the challenge is implementation. You find that issues of inclusive education are taken care of under Basic Education Act, and our education sector policy, everything, even under our constitution, Article 52, it's very clear when it comes to education for marginalized and also children with disabilities. But the challenge has always been implementation. We have so many policies, we have so many legislation on inclusive education, but implementation is what is wanting. If we were to implement those policies, I think every child would be in school. Every child, regardless of their status, whether economic status, whether disability, whether refugee, they would be in school. But the challenge is implementation. Thank you.
Now I was trying to find my unmute. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that just going back to the experience in Myanmar and Thailand in terms of our implementation, it's, you know, the project that we undertook with EAC did have a role to play in facilitating and making sure that the dialogue around policy and changes in policies was, you know, was something that was being considered by the government of Myanmar, and the rights and around the rights and responsibilities for migrants, especially migrant populations. And in Thailand, you know, access to equal education policies do exist even for migrant communities. But what we also found is, is exactly what Dennis is talking about. Despite the fact that these policies existed, and this was a commitment that the Thai government had made, and at that border, there were aspects of discrimination. You know, in the host communities where, and there was also a lack of awareness, where the perceptions of the migrant population were different, because they were not aware that they could access education, or they actually had a right to be in those public schools. But at the same time, the communities or the host communities were not accommodating of migrant learners sharing the same classrooms as their children. So it really led to a complex situation where you had to, there were these centers, migrant learning centers that were set up. The challenge with that is that they were also not registered institutions. And so the children who were quote unquote graduating from those facilities were not necessarily recognized. And that's a huge policy issue that is, that is beyond Myanmar. We see that in every refugee situation. How do we make sure that the education that children are receiving, especially displaced children, refugee children, is acknowledged first, where they are coming from with that level of education, and any education that they are receiving in their host communities, and how they are accommodated. And we are seeing, especially other donors as well, EAC is also part of the GPE, I believe the GPE is moving towards supporting, and ECW is also moving towards supporting the integration of migrant children and displaced children and refugee children in the public school systems of the regions where they have been displaced.
I think that, the recognition of the children and the supporting them in the schools, but also the recognition of the learning and credentials that they come with when they are displaced is so important as well, and making sure that that takes place. So that they don't just lose, they won't lose their learning, but being able to continue with their learning as well. So we are actually technically at time, but I do want to get in these last two questions, just because I think one of them will help us wrap up, but one of them is very pertinent to the time that we're currently living in. So anonymous attendee asks, will the inclusive strategies that worked before COVID-19 still be effective with the increasing number of out-of-school children? And did COVID-19 create a new category of children excluded from the system?
One of the strategies that we saw being extremely effective in preventing dropout, as well as in increasing the adherence to remote learning, was precisely the engagement of girls and boys in empowerment forums or in leadership skills development spaces. The mentorship that was received, the support from mentors, was absolutely essential to keep them in school, and the peer support was essential to identify cases, for example, where girls were being married, and flag those cases to community actors that were already empowered to respond to them, to speak with the parents, to dissuade them from moving forward with the marriage. Another strategy that was extremely effective in reducing the risk of dropout was the engagement on village savings and loans. We saw that parents who were already engaged in those associations that had access to safety nets through the VSLAs were able to continue to support their children throughout this period, and despite the economic crisis, bring them back to school once schools reopened. The uptake of remote learning is closely linked to the ability of the child to catch up with the learning losses later on. And one of the things that we found to be critical for uptake of remote learning was the child's ability to self-motivate and organize, despite the workload at home and the added anxiety and the impact on mental health, particularly depression, during the pandemic. So what we have seen is a protective effect of those existing interventions in the sites where they were implemented vis-a-vis comparison sites, as we are tracking the impact over time.
I think we can have maybe one other person if you want, if someone else wants to also jump in on this. But I think that's exactly what we've seen with some of the other work that we've been doing with our partners around responses to COVID to keep children learning, is that often the strategies that were already being implemented, the engagement with communities, engagement with parents, close interaction with teachers and the families, actually supported the children that were brought into school to continue learning when schools shut down. If anyone else wants to talk to this, otherwise I will go to our last question. No? So the last question is it possible, or how, I'm going to say, is it possible to enroll such a large number of out-of-school children in quality primary education, which goes to our theme for the day, what does it take? So maybe in just like a one sentence thing, because we've got the 4 of you on, and if you could give us your key takeaway on what it takes to enroll such large numbers of out-of-school children in quality primary education. Two sentences. Go ahead, Ellen.
I'll go first.
It's like everyone's mics are off at the same time.
I would say collaboration, in a word, not a sentence, collaboration.
Dennis.
Yes, partnership is key.
Blended learning modalities.
I'd say life stage focused learning opportunities, making sure that we are looking at all children and the needs of each individual needs of every different group of, grouping of child based on their life stages and what they need to learn. And understanding that when you're talking about primary education, we're not necessarily talking about formal or what we call formal education and what that means.
Yes, for me, I'll say enhancing capacity of the teachers and also the Ministry of Education to be able to offer quality education long after we are gone.
Also very pertinent, and I'm going to add a few things that I kept hearing from your presentations and your interventions. Policy, implementation of policy. So not only does the policy have to be in place, but it has to be implemented. Support to families, flexible programming, deconstructing myths and attitudes around marginalized children, teaching children in languages that they understand, teaching children where they are and at the levels that they are. Flexible programming, I already said, sorry. Empowering not only the children, but the parents. And learning that schools are more than reading and writing. They are also about teaching children how to learn citizenship, how to grow, and social cycle skills. Changing our language around how we look at the marginalized children so that we are looking at children as humans and with agency that are capable and empowered. And with that, I think we have some key takeaways, and we can thank everyone for their participation. I want to thank each and every one of you for the work that you've done as educated child partners, both past and current, and hopefully future. And hopefully we can continue to enroll all children and keep them in learning and education. And for our partners who also participated as attendees, thank you very much. We look forward to continuing our work together. We will continue through the series. We'll be looking at what it takes, creative partnerships, resources beyond financing, creative financing, and many, many other aspects of what we've learned over the last 9+ years that it is necessary to get children into school. So once again, thank you all. And I believe, and thank you to Ryan, the man behind the scenes who's made this possible on the technical side. I believe this will be posted to our website soon as well for those who want to either rewatch or share it out.